Mom, what are all these banners on the light poles?
Lansdale is honoring its residents that served in the armed services over the years. They call them hometown heroes.
Are they all heroes?
Well, in a lot of ways, they are all heroes. I'm sure each one has an interesting story to tell. There is your grandfather's banner. Do you know he kept a war diary of his time overseas during World War II?
I can remember as a young boy playing Army with my friends in the neighborhood. War was fun and innocent, an adventure, quite a contrast to the real thing. I can't remember the first time I ever read my father's war diary, but as I grew, my interest in it grew. I have savored everything my father has told me of his war experiences, and looking back, I wished I had asked him for so much more. To be able to read his diary with him, to learn where he was, what he did, what happened to him, how he felt about it. But I also know that if he were here today, that would be unlikely to happen. My father didn't speak to me in great detail about his war experiences. That was not his way. War is not a natural human event. Everyone deals with their experiences in different ways. To have pushed him for more information would have made him uncomfortable, or worse, caused him pain.
This is the diary of my father, Charles Fair, which he kept during his service in the Army during World War II. The Army expressly forbade soldiers from keeping a diary, for fear if captured, military information would be given to the enemy. As the war came to an end and the fighting stopped, my father came upon a typewriter, where he transcribed his handwritten notes into diary form. This diary gives a clear look into the life of an infantry soldier, one comprised of both boredom and terror.
Our father, Charles Fair, was born on March 7, 1922. He grew up on Penn Street in Sourton, Pennsylvania. He was raised by his mother, Irada, and grandmother, Elizabeth Gottschalk. Our father learned to play the accordion as a young man and played up to the time of entering the Army. His family eventually moved from Sourton to Lansdale, where he graduated from Lansdale High School in 1940. While at Lansdale High, he played football, baseball, and ran track. After graduating from high school, he worked for the Kohler and Fretz Bakery, where he played in the Dough Rollers Band. When the war started, Dad was working for Fisher and Porter as a lathe operator, which afforded him a deferment from military service, as it was a defense plant. After being subjected to numerous questions over time as to why he was not serving in the military, our father enlisted. He was inducted into the Army on March 11, 1943, and transported to Camp Wheeler in Georgia, where he took basic training. After boot camp, he went to Camp Patrick Henry in Virginia, where he took motor mechanics training and awaited deployment.
Camp Patrick Henry was a U.S. Army base in Warnick County, Virginia. The land at the base is today the Newport News Williamsburg International Airport. Camp Patrick Henry was founded in late 1942. It was on approximately 1,700 acres of forest. Most military personnel processed through this camp were replacements. Nearly 750,000 soldiers were processed through the camp from 1943 to 1944. The camp had its own rail system to downtown Newport News and Shipside.
What follows are excerpts from our father's diary, which we would like to share with you. We left Patrick Henry by train down to Newport News and boarded the Liberty ship SS Richard Rush. We pulled out into the harbor in the evening and are waiting for the other ships that will join us. We pulled out during the night. As of this morning, there is no land in sight. We stopped for a few hours this afternoon and got all the ships in their proper places, and then got underway again. Our next stop will be our destination, providing nothing happens. Boy, these Liberty ships do rock and roll. I haven't gotten seasick so far, but I do feel a little woozy.
The Liberty ship SS Richard Rush departed Newport News, Virginia on the evening of August 27, 1943. Between 12 to 18 hours after leaving port, the ship formed up with other ships, and the SS Richard Rush took up position 77 in the convoy, 7th ship in the 7th column. Like other troop ships, the SS Richard Rush was positioned in the rear of the convoy as enemy air attacks usually were directed at the center of convoys. The escort included 20 destroyers and the escort carrier CVE Sante. Liberty ships were made to hold a maximum of 550 troops, and they also carried just about everything else. At this point in the war, very few ships were being sunk. This was due to the Allies having gained control of the North Atlantic from the Germans.
The meals are very lousy, both in quantity and quality. We haven't any regular cooks, just a bunch of volunteers, and they certainly can't cook. The sun was out very brightly today, and the sea was calm. We are now heading south. A cadet in the engine room says our first stop is Casablanca. Our meals were cut down to 2 a day. Our 8th day on board and the 5th day at sea. Our course is now east by northeast. Food today wasn't good enough to feed to the hogs. Mac, Floro, and I stole some onion and bread, which we ate after dark. The whole convoy has been zigzagging all day long. We haven't had any sub-scares as yet, and I sure hope we don't have any either. We now get a box of vanilla wafers every other day. Nuts. Food is really getting stinking, and I do mean stinking. Great mystery on board, as there were 48 loaves of bread missing, but we got our bellies full anyway. Although planes have been flying around the past few days, today was the first day we saw the carrier itself. We had our first sub-scare this afternoon when the carrier dropped back to pick up its planes. It didn't last long, as the destroyers only dropped about half a dozen depth charges. But I think every pipe in our ship rattled when the charges went off. The weather was nice today, and we had a close look at the carrier. It pulled alongside us and started to pick up its planes, which gave us a ringside seat. Rumors have us about 900 miles from Casablanca. I'm getting pretty tired of seeing nothing but water, and the way we're living on this tub doesn't help things either. The Navy pulled up alongside us today and started blinking out the news that Italy had surrendered. The convoy broke up this afternoon, and we have only 18 ships in our convoy now. A bunch of ant-sized British patrol boats have come up to meet us and escort us into the harbor.
11 months prior to PFC Fair's arrival at Casablanca as a replacement, the 3rd Infantry Division had completed an amphibious assault landing near that same location. At that time, the 3rd Infantry Division was part of an invasion force of 7 divisions totaling over 106,000 troops in an operation called Torch. By landing in northern Africa, the Allies had opened up a second front against the Germans that had already been fighting the British near Egypt. The German army, under the command of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, known as the Desert Fox, was eventually forced to retreat from the advancing Allies from Africa and halfway up the Italian mainland. By November 1943, when PFC Fair was first arriving at the front as a replacement, the Germans were forming their winter defensive line, called the Gustav Line, north of Naples, Italy.
We sighted land at about 0700. The city of Casablanca looked very pretty from the harbor, but after we landed and rode through the joint, it didn't look so nice anymore. We docked at about 11:30, and were taken to Camp Don B Passage on the outskirts of Casablanca. We are getting ready to ship out. Everything is packed and loaded on trucks. Rumor has us going to Oran, North Africa. We left Camp Don B Passage and trucked down to the railroad and boarded some crates on wheels called 40 and 8s. So called because in the last war they carried either 40 men or 8 horses. They are about 20 feet long and 8 feet wide. We have 33 fellows in our car, and there isn't enough room for all of us to sit, much less lay down. So we are going to sleep in shifts. At last we pulled into Matur, a little town near Bizerte. We are now at the 3rd replacement depot, and from here the next stop will surely be Italy. More rain, more mud. Our tent was washed away this afternoon, and we had a heck of a time finding a place dry enough to drive in the tent stakes. We had a lecture on tactics and received the bad news of a hike this afternoon. We drew 3 meals of sea rations, put our packs on our backs, and took off. Stopped for the night in some bald field. No sooner had we stopped than it started to rain. I am shipping at 1300 this afternoon. I'm almost certain of going to Naples, but there is also a possibility of going to Sicily. We went by truck to Bizerte and boarded an LCI. We are now sitting in the harbor. We have enough rations for 4 days, so it must be Naples. I was up early this morning, went on deck and saw the coast of Italy on our right. We are now passing the Isle of Capri on our left, and we can see Mount Vesuvius in the distance. We landed at Naples Harbor, and it was still burning from an air raid the night before. We were taken by truck to the 29th replacement depot. I had a sales talk on the Rangers, and almost did join them. I drew a rifle and my clothing shortage and then took a GI bath. I managed to get out of camp tonight by using the anti-aircraft guy's password of Seabiscuit. I had some vino and looked over what was left of Naples. Then came back to camp to find out that I had missed an all-night hike. I got up early and got a haircut, cleaned my equipment, and then went over to see Yatso at the motor pool. I'm bunking with Wagaman, and I've so far met Cool, Meek, Fleetwood, and Sublet. I tried to get out of camp again tonight, but the password had been changed and I got chased right back to my area, which put me right in a line to catch the night hike. It won't be long now before I ship out for the front. We boarded trucks in the evening from the replacement depot headed for Mount Rotundo. I am now in the 5th Army, 3rd Division, 30th Infantry Regiment.
The 3rd Division was finishing up the Battle of Cannanavelli and Mount Rotundo. This was November 6th through 9th in 1943, and for the next 8 days the Germans were to mount spirited counterattacks to try to retake those positions. Mount Rotundo is about 15 miles southeast of Cassino, and the failure of the Germans to retake this position meant a general fallback on their defensive line to the more defendable Cassino area.
We packed up early this morning and moved to a supply dump a little ways behind the fighting, hauling food, water, and ammo to the men at the lines. We are hauling the wounded and dead back down. I've only been here for about 6 hours, and I got my fanny in an artillery shelling, and our supply dump has just been strafed. I just got covered with dirt from a shell, and brother, that was close. I'm still shaking. We are hardly sleeping at all. We haul practically all the time. As soon as we get the dead and wounded, there are more casualties on the hill to bring down. We got a 4-hour rest last night, but we are at it again. It has been raining since last night, and it now takes us twice as long to get a wounded man down. There are no paths or trails to follow, and we have to break through the crap all the time. I'm so tired I fell asleep while leaning against a fence last night. We were bringing a dead boy down last night, and he rolled off the stretcher and rolled way down the mountain. We had a heck of a time finding him, but now we strapped them all down, dead or alive. The Germans made an attack last night, so we are busy again. We had to shovel what was left of 2 fellows into a potato sack. I've lost every bit of appetite I ever had. This is worse than anything I ever thought I would see. We got caught in another mortar barrage, and 2 of our detail got killed and 4 wounded. We are still hauling supplies up and bringing the casualties down. The division expects to be relieved in a day or 2, and I hope to God it's true. There are not many men left in the companies. We received some artillery fire around the supply dump today, and we had plenty of shrapnel bouncing off the walls. We brought 2 more wounded down and 1 dead boy. The dead boy was hit in the head, and I was getting my right hand wet, and I kept wiping my hands on my pants before I realized it was his brains running out onto the stretcher and onto my hands. Again, I don't feel much like eating. We are getting relieved tonight, and thank God for that. The 36th Division came up and took over our positions on Mount Rotundo about midnight. We walked for a few miles and then boarded trucks and rode to a group of farmhouses where we slept in haystacks until morning. At daylight, we had a hot meal and then started to set up on Mount Nikolai.
On November 17th, the 30th Infantry Regiment, after 59 days of uninterrupted combat, was relieved and put in reserve for rest and training. They moved to a rehabilitation area where they received river crossing and mountain training. Later, they were moved to the outskirts of Naples for more intensive physical conditioning and amphibious training.
It's still raining as it has been for the past week and a half. Some no-good jerk stole my blanket and overcoat, and I'm now freezing my tail off. I had my shoes off last night, and I could hardly get them on again this morning. I still feel lousy, and I went on sick call this morning. The doc said I had a touch of the yellow jaundice. If it does not get any better, he says he will have to send me up. I got a shelter half tent and some blankets, and was assigned to Company E, so I'm now a straight rifleman. I guess my mechanics training was a waste of time. We went out on the range all day, fired plenty of ball ammo in the morning, but in the afternoon I was made the rifle grenadier of our squad, and I spent the rest of the day getting acquainted with the thing. I also fired the bazooka a few times. My shoulder is darn sore this evening from the grenade firing, but after I get used to it and how to handle it, I guess it'll be okay. There was a talk on current events and then an inspection of our quarters. Then we were all taken down to the shower unit, and I had my first real bath since I left the States. We were up again at 0400 and hiked about 8 miles down to the beach. We had lectures and demonstrations on landings, and then had 2 practice landings in the afternoon and 1 at night. We walked back to our area, and do I have blisters from the salt water. Got back about 2000 hours and my tail is really dragging. They let us sleep until 0800 this morning. Then went out and fired my last grenades as we are leaving tomorrow morning for the real thing. I tried to get some sleep. Don't know what's wrong, but I feel bum. We were up at 0600 and struck camp. Walked all the way down to the docks and boarded an LCI, which took us out to our LST. I'm really feeling lousy, and in more ways than one. I ate what little breakfast I could, as I feel terrible if I try to eat anything at all. The captain called us together and gave us the lowdown on this deal. We are to hit behind the lines about 25 miles below Rome, at Anzio and Nettuno. Our purpose is to stick our spurs into the German rear and tear up their supply lines, especially along a highway number 6. This so the troops on the Cassino front can break through. H-hour is 0200 and will probably be tomorrow morning.
The Anzio landing was called Operation Shingle and was designed to leapfrog up the Italian coast and cut inland in order to threaten German lines of communication and supply, thus forcing a German withdrawal from the formidable defensive line at Cassino.
Everybody was ready at midnight. We got in the Higgins boats and were lowered into the water. We made our circles around the LST until all the Higgins boats were in order and then took off for the beach. When we got on the way, 2 ships came up and fired concentrations of rockets onto the beach. When we were getting close to the beach, the fire lifted and we began to pour onto the beach. We were surprised out of our shoes as we met no enemy resistance in our sector. We got inland quickly and moved on. By morning, we were sitting on the slope of a hill dug in. We have met no ground opposition as yet.
The 3rd Division assaulted the coast south of the towns of Anzio and Nettuno. Coming ashore, the 30th Infantry Regiment was in the middle with its sister regiments, the 7th and the 15th, on either side. On D-Day +1, the 2nd Battalion advanced to capture Bridge number 4 on the Mussolini Canal, which they did.
We finally took the bridge, but it cost us 2 dead and 3 wounded in our platoon alone. I am really sick, and I ain't kidding. The platoon medic says I have yellow jaundice, as my eyes are yellow and my skin is starting to turn also. Our lieutenant told me to go to the medics, and I am now at the 52nd Battalion Medics Receiving Station. From here I go to the evacuation hospital, which is right on the beach.
The Krauts are bombing day and night, and are coming pretty close to the hospital at times. Our anti-aircraft are bringing down quite a few of their planes. Last night they brought down 5 that I saw. I guess I will be here until tomorrow, as they are naturally evacuating the seriously wounded first. I can't eat anything at all, and the smell of food even makes me sick. I boarded a British LST this morning, and I am now on my way to Naples. We pulled into Naples Harbor about midnight, and we will be aboard until morning. I still can't eat anything, although I did drink a little coffee. I was taken off the ship early this morning and out to the 45th General Hospital, where I was assigned to a ward. I went to sleep after the doc saw me. A nurse woke me up about noon and said she wanted to see if I was still alive, as I had been sleeping for about 18 hours. I still can't eat anything, but I am getting some fruit juices down.
Yellow jaundice was a broad term used mostly to describe the underlying disease of either serum or infectious hepatitis, which was prevalent during the war years in North Africa and Europe. Starting late in the summer of 1943, close to the time of the invasion of Sicily, the incidence of disease rose to unprecedented heights. It presented very serious problems to the officers in the medical department, who were suddenly confronted during combat with an enormous number of cases of a disease for which the means of spread were not clearly understood. No methods of prevention were known, and no specific therapy was available. During the period 1943 to 1945, infectious hepatitis proved to be the greatest cause of disabling illness among U.S. forces in the Mediterranean and North African theaters. PFC Charles Fair spent the next 6 weeks recovering from yellow jaundice.
I got some dope today on how the company stacks up by now. Our captain, first sergeant, 2 of our squad leaders, and about 10 other guys are all dead, and the rest have almost all been wounded or captured. I pulled out of the 29th Replacement Depot and down to Naples Harbor. I boarded an LST and expect to hit Anzio tomorrow morning. We reached Anzio around daylight and stayed our distance. Jerry is, as usual, shelling the harbor and the waterfront area. We had 2 slight air raids around noon, finally docked at evening, and was taken to our service company where we are spending the night.
We were taken to our kitchen and supply area to pick up a day's rations and ammo. I am going up to the company with the ration jeep tonight. I rode to the ration dump that was about 1.5 miles behind the lines. I waited until our company ration detail came up to pick up their rations and went back to the line with them.
The battalion's position at this point was near Carano and Padiglione. Following the Allied landing at Anzio, the Germans rushed from surrounding areas to try to push the Anzio beachhead back into the sea. By March 4th, 1944, the Germans' tactics changed to one of containing the Anzio beachhead rather than reducing it. Both sides had realized that no decisive result could be achieved until the spring and reverted to a defensive posture involving aggressive patrolling and artillery duels while each worked to strengthen their fighting capabilities. By late May, there were some 150,000 Allied troops in the bridgehead, including 5 U.S. and 2 British divisions. Facing them were 5 German divisions.
I am once again in the 3rd Squad, 3rd Platoon. The boys say things have been fairly quiet for a front line. I only know 2 of the boys in the platoon, as the rest of the fellows are all new. All the guys that we landed with that weren't killed are in the hospitals. There are occasional exchanges of artillery fire by both sides, but our artillery is doing most of the shooting. It rained again last night, but I did keep 2 of my blankets dry. During the day, we can't stick our heads out of our hole, but at night we do all of our work. We sleep during the day in safety, as the artillery has a perfect view due to the flat pool table lay of the land. Went on the ration detail last night and had no trouble. We are dug in 2 men to a hole, and at night, if one of us isn't on some detail, we stand guard 1 hour on and 1 hour off the whole night. Our lines are low in men, but we do have plenty of automatic weapons.
Got our things together last night and had a combat patrol using the whole platoon. We attacked a hill in front of G Company and wiped out a German outpost and got some papers off of a dead Kraut. Things got pretty hot and we withdrew. We are now in Corps Reserve until the rest of the division gets relieved. Rumor has us going all the way back to the beach and taking training for a big push.
The entire division was put in reserve and given a 2-week rest. This was the first time the division was off the front line since D-Day. After more than 2 weeks out of the line, and every company had completed its training, the order came through on 12 April to relieve elements of the 45th Infantry Division.
Things are plenty hot around here as the 45th has lost the cemetery, and the Krauts are shooting up a storm all over the place. Our outpost was driven back last night, but they weren't hit. Another Jerry patrol came screwing around and we held our fire until they got very close and everybody opened up on them. I am now supposed to have charge of a squad until they get things straightened out, and I hope they get someone soon. I went after the squad's rations at the command post and I had just walked away with them when a mortar came in right where I had been standing. Things were quiet the last few days, but we got orders to dig in deeper as tomorrow morning G Company is going to attack Paratrooper Hill. We are going to lay down a smoke screen in front of our position and fire all of our weapons. This is to try to make the Krauts think the attack is coming from our sector. This will probably bring all the crap Jerry has right down on top of us. So excuse me while I dig a few miles deeper.
I don't know why, but I got elected to take a recon patrol out last night to find out if I could hear anything going on in the Jerry line. 2 men and myself went. We went through the hole in the wire, 100 yards to the right, and then 100 yards out into the cemetery. We didn't see or hear anything and reported back. Heard a rumor that we were supposed to be relieved tomorrow.
For the 30th Infantry Regiment, after coming off the line, the first 3 weeks of May were devoted to preparation for the giant all-out attack designed to smash the beachhead and launch an offensive that would carry the Fifth Army to Rome. The training was both physical and mental, and was purely offensive, with emphasis on storming pillboxes and other infantry emplacements.
I was put on a detail to demonstrate some kind of new way to fight. It's a series of sleds, or rather they resemble a boat. They are hooked together and are just big enough to hold one man. These in turn are hooked to a tank or tank destroyer and are pulled along behind it. It works all right at low speed, but at high speed they are liable to unhook and get all tangled up. Just one more way to get to a hospital. I ate more dirt than there is in Italy today. I went to Rifle Grenadier School today, as I am once again the grenadier of our squad. I'm beginning to wonder if I will ever get rid of this darn job. New rumor has us leaving and starting the push to Rome in a few days.
We moved out last night about 8 o'clock and got to the assembly area around midnight.
We are spending the day here and will move up tonight and attack in the morning, with land, sea, and air support. Also, the 1st Armored Division is going with us. The cooks tried to bring chow up to us this morning, but Jerry zeroed in on them and got a lucky shell right in the oatmeal pot. 5 were killed and I don't know how many wounded. I am really sweating this deal out. I'm so darn nervous I can't keep still. We moved out around dark just behind the 34th line and dug in. About 0600, everything that was on the beachhead let loose and kept right on firing until the attack started. In the meantime, the Air Corps was dropping bombs in wave after wave of planes. At 0630, G Company kicked off across the line of departure, and we followed through. G Company had about 6 of its men laying in a heap so mangled and bloody I didn't even recognize them as bodies at first. One of them had an iron stake used for putting up barbed wire driven all the way through his head. Another had his back blown away and I could see his ribs sticking through his guts. Another had a leg gone, but was alive and smoking a cigarette calmly, waiting for someone to come and carry him out of there. We took our first objective without too much trouble, but the second was a bastard, as we had to attack across level land and the Kraut was dug in good. We fought into the German line and chased them out, but they had the position zeroed in with mortars, and it rained mortar shells for the next 15 to 20 minutes. By the time it was over, we had so many dead and wounded we couldn't handle them all. F Company passed through us to our right, and we started trying to get the seriously wounded out and make the others comfortable. We ran out of morphine and just had to let them moan. Finally, in the evening, we got some help and got the rest of them out. Then we tried to go to sleep.
The Company G casualties were the 2nd Platoon, which took a direct hit from artillery, which wounded 2 officers and all but 4 of the men. They could not be evacuated quickly enough, and the entire battalion had to file through this narrow ditch as it was the only covered approach available. The breakout was part of Operation Diadem, which called for the Allies at both the Anzio beachhead and all along the Gustav Line, 60 miles to the north, to attack at the same time along a broad front. This caused the German defenses near Cassino to break and force a hurried retreat by the entire German 14th Army to points north of Rome.
We are on the attack again, even though we only have about 60 men left. Practically no enemy resistance was hit, and we moved way ahead of our objective and crossed Highway number 7. We got on a hill behind Cisterna and dug in the dark. We stayed in these positions until the afternoon and then advanced on Corey. Took the town and got up into the hills at last. On the way in, we were bombed and strafed by our own planes, which killed 4 and wounded many.
Sherman Pratt, in his book Audubon to Berchtesgaden, gave a first-hand account of this strafing. In his book he said, "On the 2nd day of the breakout from the Anzio beachhead, another of those regrettable incidents occurred when your own friendly troops are shot up by our own team because of confusion and mistaken identity. It was in the middle of the morning, and off to our right in the distance we could see an American motor column creeping slowly along a road near the base of Monte Lapini. The road seemed to be the one leading into the small town of Corey, off to the east. That was to be our later objective. My God, someone near me shouted. They act like they are going to attack our own convoy. The words were hardly out of his mouth when we saw puffs of smoke from the lead plane's wing guns, and a moment later we heard the loud and harsh clatter of multiple machine gun bursts. We could see the dust kicking up around the trucks and jeeps, and some started burning and smoking.
Moved out again in the morning and advanced until we made contact with Jerry, and then dug in fast under fire. We got set up by midnight.
Here the division, having left Corey and moved through Giugianello and was approaching Lariano. The division had passed through enemy-prepared defenses called the Velletri-Lariano-Artenna line. The German Hermann Goering division had been rushed south to man these positions. Lead elements of that division began encountering the 3rd Division. The quick Allied advance meant that the Germans had to instead form defensive positions to the west of Lariano.
Another bloody attack. Our line of departure was to be a railroad, but when we shoved off, we had to fight about 200 yards to get to the railroad. We got across it, but there we were stopped cold for a while until we had some help from the other companies. We again had lots of casualties. At least 10 were killed, and from 30 to 40 wounded. Among the dead was Tex, but he was killed due to his own fault, as he went for a Luger and a sniper got him clean through the neck. We dug in a few hills further up for the night. French troops relieved us last night, and we moved to another assembly area. We walked and walked until late afternoon, where we held up on the outskirts of Rome until daylight. We dug in and got a couple hours sleep. 3rd Recon was reported in the city that afternoon. We got up before daylight and took off for Rome. We hit the city at dawn and soon had our area occupied. We are now supposed to garrison the place, and we are doing all kinds of guard duty.
The division was trucked west on Highway number 6 to Rome. Each company, like Company E, was assigned to secure a bridge over the Tiber River. The 30th Infantry Regiment, including Company E, was assigned to garrison the northern part of Rome.
Romans either are crazy happy to see us or else they are a bunch of darn good actors. Anyway, we are getting all the drink we want for free of charge. We moved to barracks where the city's cops used to live. We are now on motorized patrols in the city, and this is a bit of all right. It looks like the whole darn Fifth Army is in Rome. At the latest report, there were 10,000 GIs AWOL in Rome, or else they were lost, and most of them were lost. New rumor, hot off the griddle, has us taking amphibious training and then hitting southern France.
After 2 months in Rome and Naples, studded with guard, recreation, and training, the 30th Infantry Regiment once again was jumping off to participate in a major Mediterranean amphibious operation, destined to be its last in World War II. As the 3rd Division and the rest of the 5th Army liberated Rome, the long-awaited Allied invasion of France on the Normandy coast, D-Day, began. Operation Overlord, as it was called, consisted of an initial wave of 10 divisions totaling over 156,000 American, British, and Canadian troops.
We had church services at 1200 by one of the Navy boys, and he did a good job. Arrived at Corsica about 1700. We were completely briefed this evening, and we are to land about 35 miles east of Toulon, France. The coast and for miles inland is very heavily defended, but they are banking that there won't be many troops there, but we are expecting the worst. We are sitting in the Corsica harbor, but are leaving tonight. Tomorrow morning is it. The 30th is in reserve, and we will land after the initial beach is taken and push through and take the high ground. Things are pretty quiet except for a few fellows singing up in the bow, but they are singing songs like Girl of My Dreams.
Girl of my dreams.
And nothing cheery. All the songs are about home. I guess we are all thinking the same thing.
Secrecy for this assault landing was impossible. The tremendous concentration of shipping in the Naples area preceding the attack, the shifting of the bulk of the air strength to Corsica, and the limited areas of southern France where the landing might be likely meant the chance at a tactical or strategic surprise was minimal. Additionally, it was known that the assault beaches had offshore obstacles constructed to oppose any landing, and the landings would be during daylight. The division was to land on the Saint-Tropez Peninsula. The 30th Infantry Regiment would land behind the 7th Infantry Regiment on the southern coast of the peninsula at Red Beach, at Baie Cavaliere.
I wasn't able to sleep, and only a few of the other boys are sleeping. A few are just staring. Others are smoking, and I sure wish this was over with. According to the schedule, we will hit about 0800, so I still have about 3 hours to sweat it out. 0645, and I'm getting that clammy feeling and getting weak in the knees. I guess I took a dozen drinks of water in the last hour. I feel like I'm floating. I guess I'm really scared this time. Maybe once we get moving, I'll feel better. Anyway, here's hoping Lady Luck is with me once again. We landed about 0800, and the resistance was light compared to what we expected. We lost a few Higgins boats. There were some bodies floating in the water, and some lying on the beach, but not as many as we expected to see. We also lost 2 LCIs with underwater mines. The wrecked Higgins boats accounted for most of the casualties we had. We got inland as quick as we could and started to cut across the peninsula to get to our objective. We had considerable trouble with roadblocks and fortified positions, but we had a tank destroyer with us, and a tank destroyer can be a mighty big convincer. We reached our objective at dusk, reorganized, and moved out.
The 30th Infantry Regiment took sniper fire and mortar shelling on the beach. The regiment passed through the 7th Infantry Regiment and took La Croix against enemy resistance about an hour after landing. By 4:30 p.m., the 2nd Battalion reached a key road junction west of Saint-Tropez. This cut off the peninsula. The 2nd Battalion then moved in the direction of Cogoglin. The 30th Infantry Regiment lost 1 man on this D-Day. Forces opposing the American landing were 2 divisions composed of Turkomans, Poles, and Slavs. The German defenses assumed an Allied landing further west to the ports of Marseille or Toulon.
We walked and walked up these mountains, and what mountains they are. Finally stopped about 0400, only because we couldn't go any further. We slept till dawn and finally got trucks and moved to the rest of the battalion. People in the towns are treating us like kings. We moved until evening when we met rather stiff resistance in the town of Brignoles.
The Germans were interested in a strong delaying stand in Brignoles and had brought up reinforcements from the 757th Regiment and the 338th Infantry Division to hold this town. Here the assault on Brignoles was Company E. They took heavy sniper fire and direct self-propelled gunfire. They were greatly supported by Company H's 81mm mortar fire. During the night, the company was engaged in heavy street fighting with the Germans. The enemy fought desperately to block the American advance in order to cover their general withdrawal. Town after town was liberated by the regiment in a rapid advance to catch up with the retreating enemy. Near Bolt, France, south of Rambervillers, on November 11, 1944, the entire 30th Regiment was relieved by the 103rd Infantry Division. While in rest and rehabilitation, the 30th Infantry Regiment prepared for crossing the River Meurthe, codenamed Operation Powerhouse 1.
We moved out after dark and rode in trucks as far as we could, then walked the rest of the way to the river.
The German defensive line was well prepared, especially in the 3rd Division section of the front. Powerhouse 1 called for a nighttime secret advance by the regiment with river crossing such that bridgeheads would be established overnight and the troops could attack in the morning.
We came up to the river and continued right across a bridge the engineers put up under the Kraut's noses. After getting across, we lay in ditches and waited until H hour. Before dawn, everything in the books opened up. The fire lasted about 20 minutes, and then we pushed ahead with our attack. Took the town in front of us and had to scrap some to get it.
The 2nd Battalion assembled at De Fosse on the Meurthe River. Fire support for this operation included machine gun anti-aircraft guns, tanks and tank destroyers, and all available infantry weapons. 2nd Battalion's objective for the day was the capture of Hollande and Herbache. The battalion jumped off at 06:45 and La Hollande was taken in 1 hour. By 09:30, Hills 357 and 354 were taken, and Herbache was reached by 10:15.
They woke us up very early as we were going down to help the 36th Division in the Colmar Pocket. We trucked down and got off and walked to an assembly area for the night. We slept in some houses in a town.
All 3 battalions of the 30th Infantry attacked. The 2nd and the 3rd Battalions moved through mountainous forest of Sigolsheim into firing positions near Ersprung. The 2 battalions were moving down twin hill masses flanking the village of Toggenbach. Approximately 50 Germans on Hill 672 opened up on Company E. The company did a swift flanking maneuver and overwhelmed the Germans and then organized night positions to the east of the Toggenbach Road. Companies G and F were subjected to heavy artillery concentrations during the afternoon.
We are now in defensive positions. We moved on into the town of Kentzheim and finally relieved the 36th Division. And what a beautiful powder keg they did leave us with. There is more German artillery landing in our area than I have seen since Anzio. We had a couple more wounded from the artillery. They are really banging them in now, on the average of at least 6 or 7 a minute, and I'm not lying.
The battle in and around the area of Kaiserberg lasted 4 days and involved as many as 6 counterattacks per day by the Germans. The Battle of the Bulge began on this day 200 miles to the north. The Germans were attacking at many points along the entire front in order to draw attention away from their 450,000-man offensive through the Ardennes forest of Belgium, where they succeeded in opening a bulge in the Allied lines. The Battle of the Bulge took place from December 16, 1944 to January 25, 1945, and was the last major German offensive campaign on the Western Front in World War II. The Bulge, was the largest and bloodiest single battle fought by the United States in World War II.
We are on outpost during this time, and Jerry's patrols are very active. They came messing around almost every night. We had one close shave as we got caught in a barrage while getting our rations.
From January 1 to January 17, both sides held defensive positions. There were many cases of frostbite.
We moved out about 02:30 in a night attack on a town. Took our objective by dawn, including a couple of tanks, and dug in around the edge of town. We had 2 men killed on a recon patrol.
The 30th Regiment attacked at 0400 hours with 1st and 2nd Battalions. The 2nd Battalion had to fight over 2,000 meters, mostly through the Reed Weir Woods, just to get to their initial line of departure. During this early AM fight, Private First Class Fair knocked out a German tank single-handedly and was later awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions.
As recounted in the history of the 30th Regiment by Private First Class Joseph E. Doobie, a fellow rifleman,
seeing an enemy tank parked in the shadows while our company was clearing Holzwehr, PFC Fair opened fire with his M1 rifle on the 4-man German tank crew as they ran to get into the tank. He killed one and wounded another. As the other 2 Germans fired the tank's 75mm gun at his company, PFC Fair exposed himself to the fire and ran 75 yards across an open field, climbed on the tank, and dropped a white phosphorus grenade into the open turret, killing the 2 remaining enemy crewmen and silencing the tank, thus enabling the company to continue its mission unmolested.
The 7th and 15th Regiments are attacking tonight at 2100 hours. We will follow them up in reserve and take over their positions along the canal after they are taken. It has stopped snowing, but is still so cold you can't keep warm at all. My feet and hands are both numb already. The 75th Division took over our positions, and we pulled back into Holzwehr. We cleaned up in general and got a hot meal in the morning. We had the rest of the day to ourselves, but we are moving out again tonight in another attack. Before we moved out, we had a foot inspection, and I did not pass. So I am now on my way to the hospital with either trench foot or frostbite. I arrived at the 27th Evacuation Hospital about midnight. Tomorrow we will be on our way to the 36th General Hospital in Dijon.
PFC Fair spent the next month recovering from trench foot and frostbite.
We moved out at 0730 and got to the company about 1700. The whole division is in a small town around Nancy.
The regiment attacked on February 1st, 1945 in the Colmar area until the reduction of the Colmar pocket was completed around February 7th. The division held defensive positions along the Rhine River from February 7th to February 19th, when the division was relieved by the French. The 30th Infantry Regiment had suffered the 3rd highest number of casualties in regiment history.
We moved out at 1545 and trucked to an assembly area in a small town behind the lines. We bedded down in a barn for the night.
The 3rd Division moved from Nancy to Schmidtviller, which is located in the Alsace area of France. The attack was to be on the outer approaches of the Siegfried Line. The 30th Infantry Regiment was now poised on the Franco-German border awaiting the go signal. D-Day was set for the 15th of March. At long last, the 30th Infantry was about to smash through the portals of the enemy's fatherland. Portals the regiment had been struggling to reach for almost 3 years. The end was in sight.
We were moved to an assembly area for an attack on the Siegfried Line. Just before dawn, a barrage, similar to the ones at Merv and Anzio, were laid down for us, and they kept throwing it in for at least a half an hour. We took off into the line, through the wire, across the tank traps, and into the line itself. We had a heck of a firefight in some trenches behind the boxes. We took it and set up a defense until they could bring up more ammo, as we used almost all we had. We attacked again in the afternoon and broke clear of the outermost line. We set up in a wooded area for the night.
The 2nd and 3rd Battalions assaulted the Siegfried Line, and by nightfall they were through the Dragon outer teeth. Their progress allowed anti-tank ditches to be filled by bulldozers. This allowed American armor and self-propelled guns to go through.
Up bright and early in the morning and boarded trucks. We rode all day, and we are now practically on the Rhine. Pulled in, and we are spending the night in a barn. We got to the banks of the Rhine and only had a short time to wait before the artillery barrage started, and we took off. We carried our boat down and shot across while the artillery started lifting in the most perfect coordination I have seen so far. We got no return fire on crossing, but some started to come in after we started working our way in. Finally, we got in and set up a defense in our part of the town. Doobie and a couple others were killed, and Callahan got ruined. We also had a couple taken prisoner. Our tanks came up to join us before dark, and then we dug in for the night.
Using the tactic of leapfrogging through each other's positions with supportive armor and then trucking to the next town, the 30th, 15th, and 7th Infantry Regiments were able to advance through Germany, eventually using the Autobahn to quickly move forward. Resistance slackened and finally stopped. By early May 1945, German forces were waiting at each town to surrender.
We moved out through Augsburg and set up on the outskirts. At 1200 hours, we moved out on a task force headed for Munich right down the Autobahn. We rode along with an occasional burst of fire or a shell blast. We just sweated it out. At dawn, we hit what was too much to advance under, and we had to hold it off. We set up in a small village to the left of the Autobahn. At about 0730, we took off for the next town. This time, we took another route with a series of 4 towns as our objectives. We have formed a defensive position and now are in houses. It is snowing and it is as cold as hell is hot.
The plan was to bypass small pockets of resistance and reach the southwestern suburbs of Munich. On May 7, 1945, the regiment transmitted the message to all units that the German High Command had signed the unconditional surrender of all German forces.
We, whom God has spared, offer this, our record of achievement, half humbly, half proudly. Humbly, because we know the terrible price in life and limb our regiment paid for victory. Proudly, because we, as an infantry regiment in 31 months of almost continuous combat, never failed to take an assigned objective.
After the official surrender of the German Army, Company E was assigned to patrol and clear their section, gathering surrendering German soldiers and weapons. Eventually, the troops' days were spent in drill, inspection, and training in the morning and free time, used mainly for sports, in the afternoon and evenings with an occasional stint on guard duty or a parade for visiting generals and dignitaries. In August of 1945, PFC Fair was selected to play on the company baseball team. Company E won the battalion championship. On September 21, PFC Fair started his long journey home through Germany, France, and by sea to New York. He ended up at Fort Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. He was discharged on November 18, 1945.